Welcome to The Next Best Thing. I'm your host, Aundrea Cline-Thomas. Now, this is a podcast about how to navigate career and life transitions. And like we like to say around here, a pivot and a plan B are not required. Right now, we're in the midst of what I like to call the next boot camp, where we're not just bringing you stories about incredible people, we're really breaking down how to exactly launch into your next. And so many people tell me that, they're not really content where they are, but they don't know if they need a change, or they know they need a change and they don't know where to go from there. They don't know what to do with those feelings. So joining me today is my dear, dear friend, Cate Luzio, who she uses a business concept to apply to your individual career that can help answer some of those questions. Now, Cate is the founder of Luminary, a global education and networking platform aimed at advancing women in the workplace that also includes a gender-inclusive co-working space. Cate, thank you so much for joining me.
So good to be here. Love seeing you. Love you.
Yeah, I love you. So this is how we describe you and Luminary. How do you describe yourself?
How do I describe? So how do I describe myself? I'm a connector. That I think all the 2 decades in finance and mainly on the client side really helped prepare me to be a much better connector than I ever was. And I'm a doer. I never thought of myself. It's funny. I've never thought of myself as creative. Like I had ideas and I'm a doer, right? I thrived in the corporate environment. In fact, I miss it because I had a plan and I did it, right? And so when I started Luminary, I would just still never have thought of myself as creative. Yes, I had an idea, but when I think of it, it's like, okay, I had an idea, I wrote it down, and now I have to execute on it. So a connector and executor. And I think for me, it's also, I'm a leader. I love investing in people and developing people. And that's where I get so much of my, I'll even call it joy and excitement, because as I see people, whether they're members of Luminary or my own team or partners, as just seeing that ability to change and help someone, that's what I get so much out of.
Yeah. And that's what drew me to you, really was that when we met a few years ago now, it was just like, oh, like this is my kind of lady. Like, this is my kind of because I just feel like the messages that are sent, especially in the corporate space, about how a woman is supposed to show up, that you had those qualities, but you also were hard charging. You were also like, no, I'm winning. Get out of my way. And that's how I am too. And so it's just like I love seeing somebody so successful manifesting in that way. And that was their truth, that it wasn't like you weren't putting on, you weren't trying to be a man, but yet you still were just being yourself, and that it was working out for you.
Yeah. And I really leaned into, there's a lot of words and we know this, they're all over Luminary as you see them, that I think there's descriptors, right? It's like, this word is what we use to describe a woman versus a man. And the word aggressive, and I talk about this a lot. I've been called aggressive my whole life in sports and academics and in work. And my dad told me a long, long time ago, and this relates to the sports that I played, was be aggressive, right? You have to be aggressive. But at the same time, you have to be a team player, and you have to be a part of that team and sort of learn all of that. And by the way, you have to learn leadership. And so I really, and especially in working with men for most of my career or around men, leaned into the aggressive and leaned into the relentlessness that's a big trait of mine, good or bad. And so, but I also know my audience, right? And do it appropriately. And as hard charging as I am, I also realize that I have to bring people along with me. And so from my banking life to building this company that I started 4.5 years ago, I've got to bring people on the journey with me. And I can't run too fast where I've left people behind.
No, that's so true. That's so true. And for me in journalism, if you were dainty and, coy, you're going to get bulldozed, completely bulldozed and beat, which are the two worst things that can happen to you. So so many of the qualities I'm taking into my next, of just being like, and working with other women in particular, I just see how I've been trained a little bit differently, and that I don't whisper when I speak, and that I'm not using qualifiers before I say something, that I'm just kind of a little bit more matter of fact,
Yes.
because I've had to be that way to survive in this other space. And just so folks know, Luminary has been a huge part of my next. And I remember, I'd been there so many times before I even joined that I was like giving other people tours. I was like, come on, let me show you around. And here's the story about it before I could join. But it's really taught me so much, and just taught me a lot that I didn't know what I didn't know. Right.
Yeah.
Like, so it really, really has taught me so much. You had a banking career. What were the indications that you needed to launch into your next? Because you traveled the world, you had a successful banking career, and then you quit.
I quit. I did. I ripped off the Band-Aid. I never imagined myself building my own company, launching my own company. That was just never in my sort of realm of reality, because that wasn't something that really I ever thought about doing. Again, as I mentioned, I thrived in the corporate environment. I loved having a boss. And that is interesting, because people will say, well, isn't one of the reasons you go and do something on your own so you don't have a boss? Yes, but I miss having a boss. I really, again, it's like having a coach, and meaning a sports coach, and having a teacher. I really enjoy and thrive off of feedback, and then implementing that feedback. But I had been living on a plane literally for the better part of, probably a dozen years. And I love what I did. I love my clients, but I was at the point where I didn't want to be the CEO of a bank, and that wasn't my goal. I wanted to continue to build my career, but was that the only way to do it? And one of my mentors, who's amazing and is still in banking, he said to me, what you want is impact. Everything you do, whether it's for your clients, whether it's for internal people, for the women you mentor, you want impact. So go find something with impact. And I had never even thought of that. And, I don't know, a couple of months later, I wrote the business plan for Luminary after attending an event that had very little impact for me. And I thought I could do this better. And not that it was, all good intentions, but for me, I wanted to create an environment where, all genders, but really at the heart of it is an advancing women, that there was an ability that anytime you at the time walked in the space, now we're global and digital too, you had impact, right? You made a new connection, you learned something new, you could apply something new, you're expanding your network. That is what I wanted to do. And so I did that in my banking life, and now I could do it to impact many more, and outside of one organization and one industry. And the other thing that I would say is, I really need a great culture to thrive in. And I think the finance industry was changing, but it wasn't changing or evolving fast enough. I think we have the industry, because we work with so many banks now on our enterprise platform, it is evolving. And it's much different than even when I was there 5 years ago. But for me, it was like too slow. I wanted to do something. And by the way, I never say never. I love what I did. I have a lot of those. I still have so many of those connections and relationships. So you never know if I'll go back to banking at some point.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live long lives, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll do Luminary for the rest of my life. I doubt that, right? Given just the reality of our lives, but absolutely, I love it. I watch CNBC every single morning. I read Bloomberg the first thing, and the Wall Street Journal, and so. And all of the banks that we have the privilege to work with in our enterprise model, absolutely, I'm staying close to what's happening in the market. I think the opportunity and now the benefit for me is now I've been on the small business side of the table.
Yeah.
And so I have all this financial experience and ran big businesses, and now I'm an operator, right? So now I've got a little bit of the best of both worlds around, what do small business owners really need from the banks that they work with, and hopefully can apply that knowledge if I do ever go back.
Yeah. And I think it also shows that once you have made a big leap like this before, the idea of doing it again and again and again and again isn't so scary,
Yeah.
right? You're
Yeah.
just like, oh, change is going to come. That's what is actually constant.
Yeah, and
this.
Absolutely. And it's also for me, like I did, I mean, I've worked for 3 banks, right? And so, you always want to be, as I say, a good leaver, because you never know. The business world is small. When you're in industries, as you know this, the industry that you work in is even smaller. And so really keeping up with relationships and continuing to invest in those relationships, for me, has been sort of paramount in what we do as a company. But also for me personally, I can't just surround myself with founders. I have to really tap into that broader network, both from an experience level, an advisor standpoint, and sort of what's happening in the world that in my founder sort of, tunnel sometime I forget about. So really investing in those relationships is critical for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go to the class that you teach about a SWOT analysis. I had never heard this till I went to Luminary. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. In business, you say that you don't start with your strengths first. Is that what you should do when you're talking about it in terms of your personal career?
Yeah, I took this idea of a SWOT. So for any of you that are listening and that have done a SWOT, the majority of time you do it for, if you're launching a new business within a big business. This is kind of textbook, like old school business school, but you do it when you're launching a new product, a new project. You do a SWOT. So you get a really quick and dirty kind of visual around what you should be aware of, your headwinds and your tailwinds, right, when you're launching that. And so kind of taking a step back, one of the things in probably the first 18 months of Luminary, I kept hearing women, I was like, what is your path? Like, what is your career plan? They really didn't have. Most people, it was like, well, I'm doing my job. That was me, right? I was doing my job. I got promoted, doing my job. And so I said, well, a SWOT analysis is a great, I think, tool to really lay out not the next 20 years of your life, but really that next 1 to 3 years. And so everyone loves to start with your strengths and opportunities, because that's the fun stuff. It's like, that's easy. But if you start with that, you're going to have blinders on. And you're likely going to forget about a lot of gaps or a lot of issues that you're going to face that, by the way, can also create opportunities. So we always say, and I always say when we're doing this, you want to start with the weaknesses and the threats, and you want to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You've heard everyone gets feedback, right? From their friends, from their bosses, no matter what you do. And so how you choose to accept that feedback, implement that feedback, et cetera, really can be laid out nicely on a SWOT, and really start to identify for you pretty quickly where you're at, where do you want to be, and what it's going to take to get you there.
Okay, so let's have people visualize it. So it's almost having like quadrants, like putting a cross on a page.
Yep.
And you have your different quadrants.
Yeah. So you'll have
so
you'll have your left, you'll have your strengths and your opportunities. And then on the right-hand side, you'll have your weaknesses on top and your threats, and that quadrant. So you're filling out these 4 boxes. And I really encourage people to do it on a piece of paper, right? So that you're writing and you're not limited. I mean, if you're digitally native type, but for me, I'm not, right? So I like to write on a piece of paper.
I do too.
The biggest thing is your strengths and weaknesses are what we say internal. Right. So these are things that you as an individual in your career can control. And I can talk about that. The opportunities and threats are really external. These are things that are likely out of your control. You may have some influence. Like, good example, a threat in your career pathing is a reorg, a manager change, a structural change at the organization. You cannot control that, right? That is not something you can control, but you need to be aware of it and how you are managing through that. A weakness would be, go back to any mid-year or year-end you've ever had, and what are some of the things that you're getting as feedback around things that you need to work on. I'm not a great delegator. I need to be, I need to have more presence. I need to speak up more. I need to have a bigger network. I need a mentor. So those are the things that you personally can control. I don't have this skill. I need this certification. I don't have this level of education. Those are things you can control. But really write those out. And I always say a good place to start is go back to your last performance review, look at that feedback. Hopefully you've gotten feedback from your manager and start there. And then start to think about when you look at your last role, couple of roles, where are the gaps that you've seen in what we say, weakness is not a great word, your opportunity for development.
Mm-hmm. Should you have where you want to go next in view when you're writing this out, or should you just kind of start where you are?
I think, it's interesting because it depends on where you're at. Right. So if you're new in an organization or you're newer in your role, I definitely don't advocate, hey, I just started my job 2 months ago and now I want to look at what my next job is. I think take stock in where you're at. If you've been in your role for a couple of years and you are really looking for, I'm ready for the next thing, I need a new challenge, I want to expand my responsibilities or my role, then you really want to think about, okay, if I've got a role in mind, what are the things that I'm missing and where are the strengths, et cetera, et cetera. But if I'm relatively new, it's like, let's take stock of what I have. And then if I try to look down the line, and I encourage everyone to do this when you're in a company, small, medium, or large. Your job is your job and you hopefully love it. But if you could pick any job in that company that you think you want to do, what is it? And look at the person that does that job today. What do they have that you don't?
Yeah, no, that's great. What if you want to go outside of your industry? You want to, it's a career change.
Yeah.
How do you approach that from the sense of a career change?
The same thing. So let's just say I was in. I'll give you a real life example from when I was in. So I love what I did. I love the clients, but I really wanted to do more work with talent development outside of just my team. And so in my mind, I thought, well, what if I could make the move to HR or run DE&I? And so really identified, okay, what are the things that I'm missing I didn't have any traditional HR experience. I, wasn't in traditional DE&I. I didn't have any of those skills when I looked at an HR leader. And by the way, you can just look up anybody's job, Google it, right? What does a CHRO do? There were a lot of things that I wouldn't have had. Now, there were a lot of things that I did have that I could those transferable skill sets. And I think when you do a SWOT, if you're in that position, it really identifies your transferable skill sets that you could apply to this whole new pivot or a whole new industry or even a brand new kind of role that you could leverage. And then I think be honest with yourself around the gaps. Well, hopefully you're all, quick learners and really want to learn. Those I think are exciting parts of it, right? This goes back to, I was speaking at an event yesterday in Boston, and everyone loves to bring up this study that was actually originally done for HP and then McKinsey and Lean In took it, but no offense to McKinsey and Lean In, but it was that men can apply for jobs that they're, 30 to 40% qualified, and women apply only if they're 90 to 100% qualified. Qualified is such a bad word, right? I think it's like, what skills do you have that can be attributed to that new role or transferred? And then looking at those potential gaps as real opportunities to, one, yes, learn for you individually, but also a new view of how to apply some of those things isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think we as women and particular women of color have to really lean into that and own all of these transferable skill sets that they already have, and almost in a way convince whoever's looking at that to say, take a risk on me, right? I'm here and I'm ready to learn, and I want to learn and I want to do more.
So it can help you, once you do that, outlining it, it can help you create the narrative
Absolutely.
around
your story.
You see it, your story. Yeah. It helps you create your story.
Yes.
100%.
We had someone go through it a couple of months ago. She's a Luminary member, really had only worked in startups, and she was part of a layoff because they couldn't raise their next round, et cetera. And she's like, hey, I don't know what I want to do. And I think I look at all these jobs out there and I don't know if I'm qualified. She goes, I don't. And I said, well, what's your story? What's your narrative? Like, where do you excel? Where do you want to continue to learn? And so she did the SWOT, and she was like, I didn't even think about all these things about myself, right? I was so underestimating who I am and what I can bring to the table. 2 months later, she has a great job. And I remember she called me and said, what do you think about this job? And I said, I think it's right up, and by the way, jobs aren't for life anymore. So, but apply those. And I think for her, it was figuring out your story. And especially for those people that are part of like a layoff or a workforce reduction, your ego is hit. Right. So you even more underestimate what you are and what you bring to the table. So I think a SWOT is a great opportunity. Or if you've, been in small business and that's, you're going back to corporate, these are great ways to do that.
Yeah. For me and trying to launch this business, what I ultimately want to have is a full scale production company. And so I had the on camera experience and I had produced things, but I never had the producer title. Right.
Yeah.
And I never had to be fully responsible for the back end. So I took a producing job, where I had to manage people, and so I could say, okay, that's where I didn't have like the tangible experience. Let me see if I have any blinders on something. I know I could do it, but let me just go ahead and do it officially and have that experience. So then I can okay, I've got that experience now.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that I also didn't have was more of a broader network. I have a really good network, but I needed more, right? I needed people who were more entrepreneurial or more in the corporate space, which I didn't really have. So I'm at Luminary, I've met a lot of great people there. And then I'm going to a conference in a few days with, the sole focus. And I've been to that conference before, but I was in a completely different mindset,
Yes.
And so I'm going back with a focus and an intention of how I can add value and how I can partner. So again, it all comes from doing this exercise of saying, it's hard.
It's very hard.
It took me some time where I had to sit with things I did it during Christmas because I took a week off for Christmas and I was on vacation with my family at the beach. And so it was just all right, well, what does this mean? And I went back to a video you had done for Yelp and I watched it again and I took notes there and then I went back and then I answered all the questions, but it really helped me say, you can say, oh, I want to have a business or, oh, I want to do this. But that's just pie in the sky. You got to get.
What are the nuts and bolts, right? Because that's it. It's you have to build that foundation. And I think when we think about our careers, right? It was funny at this conference yesterday, someone said they had sent in a question while I was on the panel. They said, I have a rock star chief of staff and her goal in the next year is become the COO. And I said, well, is that realistic, right? First of all, you've got to also manage expectations. And I think oftentimes we think, okay, I want to be on this accelerated path. And some people are, and some people are not, but you have to be realistic and also having really open conversations and dialogue with your manager is hugely important, right? Aundrea, where do you see me in the next couple of years, right? Where do you see my role? What are the things that I'm missing today that if I were to think about this next role, where do you see me, right? When I was being recruited by JP Morgan from Bank of America, one of the selling points for me was to leave BofA and go to JP Morgan was when I went through my interview process, every single senior person and executive that I met with actually said to me, Cate, you're coming in at this job. This is where I see your next job being. They had already thought of where my runway could take me. Now, most people don't do that, right? So that was wow, they are already thinking about me over time. Granted, it wasn't in the first 6 months, it was a couple of years. That's what you should also be asking your manager, especially if you're already at a company. Where do you see me? And how long is it going to take me to get there? Or if you've already identified different roles within the organization, to have that conversation with your manager. And I always say, make it a positive one. Aundrea, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, right? But this is my aspiration over the next couple of years. This is where I'd like to get to, and I'm going to need your help. And then what does that plan look like? Because I think everyone becomes very territorial, right? Well, you're my person and I don't want to lose you. Well, ultimately, people move on and you don't want to lose them from the organization. So let's find ways to work together. And by the way, also, if you can have a really open conversation with your manager pretty early on in your journey with them, it starts to open up the door for more of those conversations. And in the back of their mind, especially if you're performing, hey, this new role's opening up. Cate would be great for that. Let me think and talk to her about it, because I know she's open to it. I want to be, and it's not just a role. I want to move. I'd love to work internationally. That's the only reason I got international opportunities, because those first couple of times I met with my manager, hey, I'm open to moving. I'm mobile. So if there's an opportunity, I'd love to apply my international experience to that. That's the only reason, right? So have those frank, open conversations with your manager.
And what if you don't have a great relationship
Yeah.
with your manager? Who do you find who can give you that type of feedback?
Yeah. So and I know the word mentor is thrown around a lot. I think you can find mentors in lots of different places, and they don't all have to be formal, right? Like, I feel like we're peer mentors, right? Like, we can bounce ideas off of each other, and we're in completely different, industries in what we do, but we can bounce ideas off. So I can get feedback from you. You can get feedback from me. I don't pay you. You don't pay me, right? So in an organization, you need to find someone that you can talk to about, hey, these are the things that I'm thinking about. Maybe that is a peer, right? That could be someone more senior in a different area that you've had exposure to and want to just grab a coffee with and just get advice. That could be a formal mentor. And I think it's really, if you don't have a supportive manager, you also have to think about, is that the right place for you, right? And if you love the company, this is the other piece. If you love the company that you work for, and I've had this in my life, but you don't have a great relationship with your manager, look for other roles within the company. Because if you love the company, you love the culture, don't automatically, just because you don't have a good relationship with your manager, leave. Start building relationships and make sure you're building those relationships in the company and your reputation, so that when you do go for that job, you can have that conversation with both whoever's hiring and your manager. Like, this is a much better fit, but I'm staying in the company.
No, that's so good. That's so good, because I think people think it's just in or out. Nothing is like a light switch anymore.
Exactly.
There are a lot more options. I want to talk to you about allyship, because you are just a master. You are really a master at it. And one thing that sets Luminary apart, because there are plenty of spaces, and Chief has just gotten into some hot water with women of color specifically. Like, a lot of these other places get in hot water where it's like, we're talking about women, but then we're really not inclusive. And Luminary is actually inclusive in action, in words, in everything. And even when you speak, I always am like heartened by the fact that you always say, okay, you'll say something, but then you say it's going to be harder for women of color. It's always, you always have that in there where it's just like recognizing it's not just this blanket term, right?
Yeah.
How did you know to do that? Like, that doesn't happen. Like Cate, I don't experience that. I was in a whole program, very well-known program, and it was like, this is what you do. Do. And it was just like, the privilege of it all was never even addressed. And this woman got to her perch, which is very high up, very visible perch, was strictly through privilege.
Yeah.
And so I'm over here trying to like use the playbook at that same place, and it's not working, right? Like, it was just with that same organization. It's just wild to me. So I'm always very skeptical, but Luminary, it's home. Like, it feels great. You're seen. Like, how do you, like, as a white lady, know how to do this? Seriously.
I think for me, it comes from a really, I think, my upbringing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my parents were, we're very sort of lower middle class. My father worked in the FBI for his entire career. My mom was a teacher. We grew up in a very multicultural area of New Jersey, right? So
Mm-hmm.
from the very sort of, elementary all through my high school, it was like I was exposed to a lot of different socioeconomic classes. I was exposed to privilege. We were privileged, right, based on other people that were in our town, and my parents over and over told us and told me and my younger brother that, when they paid for college, like, this is a gift. Most people don't have parents that have saved their whole lives to pay for their children's college. So, when you graduate, if you're on your own, basically. Even when we were in college, it was like, you have to get a job, like, if you want all these other
Yeah.
things. So I think part of it was the upbringing, and also my parents were very much focused on, standing up for yourself, but standing up for others. I always saw my mom and dad doing that in the community, and in their jobs. And so I think just by osmosis, that's what I watched. And by the way, these were two people from very white small towns in Ohio,
Mm-hmm.
right? They
Mm-hmm.
were not exposed to that until we moved to New Jersey, when my father got transferred. So I think part of them is just, it's who they are, and that acceptance. And I don't, this whole word tolerant, it's like, it's not about tolerance, it's about acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
when I was going out to, and all of my teams through banking were very diverse, right? I was just by nature of, I wanted to have more perspectives. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
have different and unique perspectives. So long story short, when I started Luminary, before we even launched, I started fake pitching it to people. And the number one feedback that I got from potential investors, remember, I didn't raise any money, that's a
Right.
huge privilege of mine, was, you don't have an application process. How are you going to keep people out that you don't want in there? And I'm like, well, that's not a community, right? A community says, welcome, we welcome you all, and we put our arms around you. And in my mind, those that didn't want to be part of that community, or the bad actors, as I say, that they will self-select, and they will leave
Mm-hmm.
the community. And so I was very, I don't know if the word is defensive. I was like, but I want to create something that's inclusive, not exclusive. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like the word exclusive, because I have been excluded for most of my life from certain things as a
Mm-hmm.
woman in banking, right? I saw it for me, as well as the other females and people of color. I didn't want to create exclusive. So that, not having an application process, making something financially accessible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Financially accessible to all, right? Versus just some. That was also part of it. And having different tiers of membership, so that, wherever you are at, you're young, you're starting your company, you have more disposable income, you can choose. And then also having a scholarship program for people that couldn't afford it. And we've had hundreds. And now with
So
our
many.
fellowship program, over 2,000. So I think, and being open, Aundrea, to feedback and listening to our members, right? And also acknowledging that I am privileged, because I used the money that I saved as a banker in order to self-fund this business. Anytime I talk about self-funding and my ability to do that, was only because I worked for 20 something years and saved a lot of money. Again, thanks to my parents
Mm-hmm.
for instilling that in me from the very beginning.
Yeah, no, it's so great. I mean, I have interviewed people on different shows that I've been at Luminary, had them on the podcast, or met somebody there who then connected me with somebody else who then connected. Like, it's just, the tentacles are very long, you know
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's just fantastic. It's really fantastic. And I appreciate it so much. I don't know if we've never talked about this before,
That
but I
makes
think
me.
it's really, really important when you are always in spaces where you're just like, you walk in and there's always, you just don't feel like the space was created with you in mind. right? And then you shape
And
shift for that. But Luminary is not that place. It's
no, and I
always
think
what was welcoming.
we're also very intentional, right? And purposeful.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually, again, I like to use examples so people realize it's not just this fluff. Someone reached out to me, who's a friend, part of a network that I'm in, and they said, "Hey, I want to pitch us for an idea for South by Southwest, and here's who I want the panelists to be." And great, and I said, "I'm happy to participate, but that's a bunch of white women." Right? You have got to have representation on the panel, and I won't be part of it unless there is. And that's the same approach we take at everything we do at Luminary, right? You have to have something that represents our community, right? It's like any company, you want to reflect your customer. In our case, our customer are our members. And so we have to make sure that we're reflective of our community and also bringing in their ideas and how they feel. And by the way, it's not perfect, right? But you have to be open to that. And I think back to the example around places like Chief. I didn't raise money. I don't have a bunch of investors telling me I have to grow 10x, and that's a huge amount of pressure. So we've been able to, over the last 4 years, really be very purposeful and intentional, build something that is hopefully very sustainable, and then that creates the right culture inside. And we listen. We listen every day to what our members are saying, and that's where our programming comes from, and that connection. So again, it's not perfect, but we work at. I tell my team, as long as we do our best every day, then we're doing what we came to do.
Yeah. And it shows. The last segment I call ACT UP, my initials ACT, and it's just,
So good.
Tangible steps right
Trademark
now.
that. Trademark
that. Steps that people can take. They're feeling it like, all right, I need to head into my next. What are some things that they can do today to launch them in that right path?
So I think number one is tapping into your network and start having those conversations. Get feedback. The one that kind of a quick and easy way is like, if you have a friend group on WhatsApp or texting friends, right? And do this with your colleagues. You say, what's one word that you would use to describe me? Or 2 words or 3 words, whatever. It gets conversation going. And most people have never asked that. And so, okay, you'll get hopefully leader, connector, relationship builder, detail oriented. That will start a list for you around where you're at today. And then think about what those words mean to you and where you want to be, right? So if today that says you're a great, individual contributor, but I want to be a leader someday. That's what you're aspiring to be. The career SWOT, again, I'm a little biased. I think it's a really easy way to just sort of get what's the current landscape look like for you, and where are you today, and where do you want to be? And then that relationship piece is, your network is your best asset, right? So keep investing in those relationships, create new relationships like you were talking about before, and going to this conference. Have a goal. I want to meet 5 new people, real conversations, and I want to be able to follow up with them. But don't forget about the relationships you have already. And so I think this is where, like, I could text you anytime and be like, hey, what's up? I'd love to chat for 5 minutes. You'll be like, great, let's find a time.
Yeah.
And when you leave an organization, hopefully it's on good terms. Don't forget about those people that your former colleagues, your former managers. You never know where you're going. And I don't mean you have to talk to them every day, but from time to time, hey, how's things going? Hey, would love to catch up. Hey, if you're ever in New York, or I'm in LA, like every time I go to cities, I reach out to people that I know. Hey, I'm coming in. If you're available, would love to grab. And that's what I did in Boston. And that's what I did as a banker every city I went to, right? Take the time to invest in relationships.
Yeah, that's also great. Cate Luzio, you're a rock star as always. And I just so appreciate you. So really quickly, you don't know this. So I read about Luminary before we met.
Yeah.
And I was just like, like, I need to be a part of this thing. Right. And so like I bookmarked it and I was like, Kate, and I was like, oh, she went to University of Maryland. I was like, I need to make her my friend. And no, seriously, like this is how my brain, I was like, oh my God. And I was like, so once I'm like so interested, I go down the rabbit hole and I read everything that I could. And that New York Wiki event came, right? And then I was like, they're like, oh, so I was like signed on to be on, to moderate this event. And I didn't know who the speakers were. Everybody wasn't finalized. And they were like, Cate Luzio is one of the people. And I was like, yes, this is my chance.
Well,
and that's how we met. So,
well, and I, I've obviously known you given your presence on TV, and then the Terp connection, go Terps, and then obviously our mutual love of joy.
Yeah.
So it's, and it's been remarkable for me to watch you make this incredible pivot and figuring out what you want to do and taking this into a whole new, like you said, building this into a big production company. So yeah. I'm excited to just be watching on the journey and a spectator and here for whatever you need.
Thank you so much.